All right, let's jump into this one. We've got a pretty fascinating topic in front of us today, something I know a lot of our listeners have been asking about.
Hmm.
The prophecy of the popes.
Mm. Yeah, it's definitely captured a lot of imaginations over the years.
For sure. So we've got this collection of material all about this centuries-old prediction about who's going to lead the Catholic Church down the line. It's really like, I don't know, opening up some kind of historical mystery novel.
It really does have that kind of feel to it. Yeah.
It does. Kind of keeps you guessing.
Right.
So we're going to be taking a deep dive. We're going to be looking at the prophecy itself, obviously. We'll also be looking at some of the notable interpretations and even a calculation that, get this, points to a very specific date on the timeline.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Okay. I won't spoil it just yet.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack.
Absolutely. Let's start with the basics. This prophecy is attributed to St. Malachy, and he was an Irish archbishop back in the 1100s. The thing is, it wasn't published until 1595.
Right. That's a pretty long gap.
Huge gap.
And that gap has caused a lot of debate about whether it was circulating in manuscript form before or whether, maybe it's a later creation altogether. There are a lot of different theories out there.
Yeah, it's a pretty big mystery in itself, just that time gap.
Yeah.
But let's set that aside for a minute and just look at, what the prophecy looks like. Because when we say prophecy, people might think of like, elaborate verses, cryptic symbols. So what are we actually dealing with here?
Well, it's actually a list of 113 short Latin phrases, and each of these phrases is supposed to describe a pope starting from Celestine II in 1143 and going all the way forward. So that's what we're dealing with, 113 short phrases.
Okay, so that's interesting.
Yeah, and to make things even more complicated, the first 74 of these have both the motto and an explanation provided.
Okay,
And then for the next three popes after that, we only have their names listed.
interesting.
And then from there on, it's just mottos. So you can see how that's led to a lot of speculation and interpretation.
Yeah, it's like they just, I don't know, decided to leave us in the dark for the more recent and future ones.
Yeah.
So since we're talking about these mottos and we have some early examples, can we just look at one or two just to kind of get a sense of how this all works?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So if we go back to the beginning, Celestine II, who was the first one on this list, his motto was, "From a castle of the Tiber." Now, he actually was from a town called Tifernum, which was near the Tiber River. So, that's a fairly straightforward geographical connection.
So that's pretty straightforward.
Right.
Location-based clues.
Yeah.
Okay. Are they all that clear-cut, though? Or do they get a little bit more, more vague?
Not necessarily. So let's jump a little bit further down the list to Pope Sixtus V.
Okay.
He reigned from 1585 to 1590, and his motto was, "Axle in the midst of a sign." Now, that might sound a little weird, but it's interesting because his coat of arms actually featured an axle on a lion.
Huh.
And the Latin word for sign, can also be interpreted as prophecy.
Ah, I see.
So there are some people who see this as a very significant entry.
Okay. Now, I think I remember you mentioning this pope earlier when we were talking about a specific date.
Yes, that's right. So this is where things get a little bit more, a little more interesting.
Okay.
Some people believe that Sixtus V marks the midpoint of the whole prophecy.
Midpoint. Okay, I'm following.
And so if you calculate forward from the midpoint of his reign, which was December 25th, 1587, you end up with March 18th, 2032.
Okay, whoa. Hold on. So this interpretation, if it's right, that means we're kind of on a countdown here.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, I see why you said it was a teaser.
Oh.
Okay. Well, before we get too lost in the future and what might happen, let's come back to some more historical examples. Yeah. Especially ones that, our listeners might recognize. So what about some of the more modern popes?
Sure, so let's take Pius XI, for example. He served as pope from 1922 to 1939.
Oh.
And his motto was, "Intrepid Faith."
Okay.
And he was the one who actually established Vatican City as an independent state. Oh, right.
So, a pretty bold move.
Yeah, that was huge.
Right.
That's very intrepid.
Intrepid indeed.
I mean, it almost feels like, I don't know, someone looked back and said, "Oh, yeah, intrepid faith, that totally fits." So I guess the question is this a pattern of just looking back and kind of I don't know, finding connections after the fact? Or were these mottos actually seen as prophetic during the time these popes were actually serving?
That's a really great question.
Hmm.
And it gets right at the heart of the debate about this whole prophecy. I mean, some people argue that the connections are they're too neat to be a coincidence. They're suggesting there's some kind of divine inspiration behind it.
Right.
Others say, no, this is just confirmation bias. People are looking for meaning where there really isn't any. And, of course, there's always the possibility that later additions or interpretations were influenced by things that had already happened.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it really becomes this kind of tangled web, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the mystery just kind of deepens. Exactly.
What about John Paul II? Because I'm assuming there's some kind of neat tie-in there with, something that happened during his life or while he was Pope.
Well, his motto is "From the labor of the sun."
From the labor of the sun. Okay.
And he served as Pope from 1978 to 2005. And, whether you see it as a coincidence or something more, he was actually born during a solar eclipse.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay. That's hard to dismiss.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, that's hard to dismiss as just a random pairing.
Yeah.
I imagine that probably fueled a lot of interest in the whole prophecy at the time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, whenever something happens that seems to align with the prophecy, people definitely take notice. Speaking of things that kind of tie in, there's another interesting connection with John Paul II. And that series of portraits of all the popes at the Papal Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls in Rome.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
It's a remarkable collection. It goes back, like, centuries.
It does, yeah. And this is one of those things where it's not a direct link. It wasn't intended or anything.
Okay.
But it's still kind of interesting. So the portraits started in the 13th century. So this was well before the Prophecy of the Popes was even published.
Oh, okay.
And it's primarily just a, historical and artistic record. It shows the continuity of the papacy. But here's where it gets interesting. So when John Paul II was elected Pope in 1978, his portrait was added, obviously, right?
Right.
And at that time, there was this belief going around that his portrait would actually be the last one that could fit on the wall.
Wait, so the physical space for these portraits was like running out just as, the prophecy was kind of pointing towards its end?
Right.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's pretty coincidental.
It is. It really adds another layer to the whole thing. Now,
Yeah.
again, whether that was planned or it's just a historical, footnote, it's still, it's up for debate. But it just shows how these different things, the prophecy, the portraits, the events of a particular papacy, they can all kind of come together in these unexpected ways.
Yeah. And it just really kind of highlights the, I don't know, interconnectedness of history and art and even prophecy, doesn't it?
It does.
I'm definitely starting to see why this topic has captured people's imaginations for so long.
Oh, yeah. It's a blend of history, mystery, and well, a touch of the unknown. And we've really only just scratched the surface here.
Okay, all right. You've definitely piqued my curiosity now.
Yeah.
Now, I definitely want to hear more about the more recent popes, especially with that 2032 date just sort of hanging out there.
All right, so let's move into the more recent popes.
Okay, yeah, and the last few on that list especially.
Yeah, because you're right. With that 2032 date, it really does feel like we're on some kind of countdown.
It does. It's hard not to get swept up in all the speculation. But let's stay focused.
Yes.
Who comes after John Paul II on the list?
So that would be Benedict XVI.
Hmm.
He was Pope from 2005 to 2013.
Okay.
His motto is Glory of the Olive.
Glory of the Olive.
And that's often connected to the Benedictine order, which
Oh.
he was a part of.
Right.
And their symbol is the olive branch, which, represents peace and reconciliation.
Okay. Yeah, so it's more of a symbolic connection there than like a direct, literal one. But, I mean, wouldn't peace and reconciliation be kind of a fitting theme for any papacy? So what is it about Benedict XVI that makes this motto kind of stand out?
That's a good point. I mean, a lot of these mottos, they could be interpreted in so many different ways.
Right.
And it's easy to look back and kind of find connections. But some people would argue that Benedict VI's papacy, it really did have this particular emphasis on things like ecumenical dialogue and interfaith relations. He really worked to try to bridge the divides both within the church and also with other faiths.
So Glory of the Olive, even though it might seem kind of generic on the surface, you're saying there's an argument to be made that it does align with what he was focused on during his time as Pope.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. So now what about Pope Francis? This is the one where I'm really curious.
Right. And this is where things get even more, well, more intriguing.
Okay.
So the motto that's assigned to Pope Francis is, "In the extreme persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit."
Whoa. Okay, that's I mean that's a really loaded phrase. Extreme persecution. That sounds pretty dire. What are the interpretations of that? I mean, what could that possibly be referring to?
Yeah, you can imagine there's a whole range of interpretations that people have put forward.
Right.
Some see it as referring to, the secularization of society, the decline in religious belief, or the challenges that come with, modern ideologies.
Okay. Yeah.
Other people point to, more specific events. They'll talk about the sexual abuse scandals within the church
Right.
or the rise in persecution of religious groups in different parts of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like a Rorschach test.
Yeah.
People are just kind of projecting their own anxieties and worldview onto it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But no matter how you interpret it, the prophecy doesn't just end there, right?
No, it doesn't. And this is where we get to the real heart of all the speculation about the end times. The final entry in the prophecy is just Peter the Roman.
Peter the Roman. No motto, just a name.
Yeah.
And the idea is that this is a separate pope, like after Francis.
That's how a lot of people read it, yeah. And this is where those timeline calculations start to get really, really interesting, because if Sixtus Vivi is actually the midpoint and we're looking at a countdown to March 18th, 2032, it doesn't leave a lot of time for two more papacies.
It doesn't, does it? I mean,
Yeah.
it really does make you wonder if there's something to this whole midpoint theory and that 888 connection. I have to admit, it is a little bit unsettling. But I keep thinking about the historical context. I mean, how has this prophecy been viewed, over the centuries? Has it always had this kind of like, I don't know, doomsday kind of feel to it?
Not necessarily. It's been interesting to look at how its popularity and interpretation have shifted over time.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes it's been seen as this guide, to understanding the papacy, and then other times it's been dismissed as just kind of a curiosity or even a fabrication.
So what drives those shifts in perception? Is it tied to like specific events or historical periods?
It often is, yeah. You tend to see more interest in prophecies, especially ones like this, during times of upheaval or uncertainty. When things feel chaotic, people are looking for explanations. They're trying to find some sense of order or meaning in the world.
That makes sense. It's like trying to find, patterns in the stars.
Yeah.
Trying to find some kind of guiding narrative.
Yeah.
What about the church itself? I mean, what's their official stance on the prophecy of the popes?
Well, they've never officially endorsed it.
Okay.
They've kind of kept their distance. They don't condemn it outright, but they certainly don't encourage people to believe in it either. And probably wisely so. When you think about, the potential for misinterpretations, for fanaticism even.
Yeah, I could see how that could get out of hand pretty quickly,
Right, right.
especially with, the internet and everything just kind of amplifying things.
Exactly, yeah.
But for people who are like, who are approaching this with a more discerning eye, I mean, it does offer a pretty unique lens through which to view history, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's this fascinating mix of, history, religion, human psychology. It speaks to our desire to try and understand the past and also to anticipate the future. And maybe it even reveals something about ourselves, our anxieties, our hopes, and just this enduring fascination with the unknown.
Yeah, you've given me a lot to think about. But I have to say, I am kind of getting drawn in by the mystery of it all, even though I'm trying to stay, objective. What about you? Does the prophecy of the popes hold any personal significance for you?
I think it's safe to say this deep dive, well, it's really made us think about how we view history, and these kinds of predictions. It's easy to get caught up in all the intrigue, but we have to remember we're talking about something that was written, centuries ago, with, all sorts of interpretations layered on top of it. Yeah, absolutely. A healthy dose of skepticism is always a good thing when you're dealing with these kinds of prophecies. It's not about taking it all literally or trying to predict the future. It's more about understanding the ideas, and the anxieties that were present when these predictions were made, and then seeing how those same ideas continue to resonate with people even today.
So for you, it's more about the questions this prophecy raises than the answers it might be trying to give.
Exactly. It's about understanding how people throughout history have thought about, these big concepts, fate, leadership, the role of the church. Whether you believe it's divinely inspired, a clever hoax, or just a weird historical artifact, it's sparked debate and made people think for centuries.
Hmm.
And that in itself is valuable.
Yeah, for sure.
And
It really does make you look at history with a fresh perspective
yeah.
and all the different interpretations.
Right.
We didn't get into all the theories about where it came from and whether it's even real. Some people think it was all political,
Mm.
maybe even trying to sway papal elections.
Yeah, there are definitely some who see it as a tool, something that can be used to support certain groups within the church or to undermine others. And then there's the whole question of whether St. Malachy even actually wrote it,
Right.
or if it was attributed to him later. We don't have a clear historical trail, which just adds to the mystery.
It really is like peeling back layers of an onion. Every time you think you've got it figured out, there's something else there.
Uh-huh.
But that kind of brings us back to you, our listener. We've looked at this prophecy, the history, the interpretations, the questions it raises. What are you taking away from all of this?
Well, you've heard a lot about this prediction. Maybe you're drawn to the historical connections, seeing how some of those mottos seem to match up with certain popes. Or maybe the mystery of where it came from is more interesting to you.
Maybe the 2032 calculation even has you a little freaked out. But whatever you're thinking, whatever you believe, one thing's for sure. The prophecy of the popes, it gives us a glimpse into how faith, history, and plain old curiosity all intersect.
We didn't even touch on all the interpretations. If you want to explore further, there's a whole world of information out there.
Maybe you'll find a new connection, or figure out some hidden meaning, or even come up with your own interpretation.
Whether you approach it as a scholar, a skeptic, or just someone who likes to learn, the prophecy of the popes invites us to engage in a conversation that's been going on for centuries.
And hey, who knows? Maybe this will be a good conversation starter at your next get-together. It's a topic that definitely gets people thinking. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the prophecy of the popes. We'll see you next time for another exploration into, well, something that makes you think.